was Letty Russell, feminist theologian and my mentor at Yale Divinity School, who during my third year there told me, when I asked her, where do I go from here, you should get a PhD. I'd kind of thinking maybe a DMin. She said no, a PhD. But where to go to get the PhD? There are lots of schools who said, oh, come here, but why would I leave a tenure eligible position to get a PhD to see if I could get a tenured position? But there was one school, Iliff Seminary in Denver, that encouraged me to work on the PhD and continue being a professor at the same time. I knew about Iliff because of a good friend of mine with whom I had taught at Yale, Barbara Hargrove. She was now just a year or so at Iliff as a professor of sociology of religion, and she was a good friend and invited me to come. It was okay. In fact, it was a fine way to work on my PhD in an integrated way. That's what I had done in working on my MA and my MDiv. Actually, I counted up as 13 or 14 years of my adult life that I've been working on graduate degrees, all the time serving in the church. And the integration really was a fine way to study and to learn and to serve at the same time. Since I was teaching full-time, and I also had 3 children at home, Kirk was entering 6th grade, and Joel 8th grade, and Mark 12th grade. My goal was to take it slow and finish before I was 50. The women at that time, shall we say, well, let's put it this way. I would love to have gotten my PhD when I was younger. I was blessed to be able to do my MAR at Concordia Seminary right after college. But women studying theology and PhD programs were, well, shall we say, not encouraged. The opening of the door to women's seminary students for ordination led to the question of, oh, maybe there should be some women professors, particularly among the women themselves. And then the question was, well, where are we going to get these women who have PhDs when the church has not been having them study for PhD? Automatically overnight, it wouldn't happen. It would take some time. I did things in a strange order, but I've come to realize it wasn't that was strange, but it took a while for the church to catch up to where I was. I started in the summer. Our family had been at Wartburg's Academy of the Rockies in Colorado, where I'd been speaking, and I actually left a few days early to go down to Denver, where the family stayed up in the mountains. Dear Joel, now a young teenager with a little smile in his voice, said, oh, Mom, don't be scared. We can get you a new lunchbox and you'll make some new friends. I did make new friends, and it was a fine place. I would go in the summer times, and then I would go January and stay at Wartburg's Denver House of Studies. And I would do independent study in between, or I'd start a course and then finish it back home. I did that for 4 years. Finally, I was able to do my residency when I got my first sabbatical from Wartburg. I could be gone the spring semester from Wartburg and get winter and spring quarters at Iliff. Mark had just finished college and basic training in the National Guard, and now was in graduate school in Phoenix. And Joel was at his first year of Gustavus Adolphus, and Kirk was a junior in high school, so he and his dad stayed home in Dubuque. I lived alone in a 2-room apartment. That was actually the first time I've ever lived alone. And I decided I liked myself. It was fine. It was an interesting experience. I flew home to see Burton and Kirk about every 5 weeks. I had some fine relationships there, and even though I was only in residency for 6 months, in some ways it seems much longer because it was such a full experience. Barbara and some of the other professors treated me more like a colleague. We'd go to church together and out to lunch on Sunday or to the movies because I was a professor as they were, and they treated me with respect in that way. I decided that I would visit the botanical gardens in Denver once a week and go to the mountains once a month, and I did. I did all my coursework, and then comps were coming, comprehensive exams. My advisors that said, well, Norma, why don't you go home and study for another 6 months or a year? And I said, but you know what life is like as a professor. If I go home, I'm even going to be more busy than I am now. So let's just do them. So I did. I studied while I was doing the coursework. I was in the groove, and it seemed appropriate to do so. In the middle of June, I took my comprehensive exams in the 3 different areas of my courses. But even that has a story to it. I went in, I think this was my 2nd exam. I had my place all set up to do my typing, and the graduate school secretary said, well, I don't have any exam here for you to take, but I was ready. And I said, look in the boxes. So she looked and she saw a rough draft of what might become the questions going from one professor to the other. So I said, give it to me, I'll take it. And I went and wrote that exam. They were so embarrassed that they were perfectly fine with the questions that I wrote. It would take 2 more years for me to finish my thesis. And those were not easy years. Wartburg had just gone through retrenchment. We had lost 1/3 of our faculty, and yet there were huge classes, and so we were teaching and working very hard. I was also working for the LCA in writing Connections with Nelvin Voss, a adult study guide that uses Luther's Large Catechism and has the scenario for us to do the learning in places of people's daily ministry. But actually working on that together, again, integrated very well. And we had finished that, had done training, and it was being used across the church. And so the final chapter of my thesis became the empirical explanation of this example of the work that I had done. My thesis actually was a joint doctorate of Iliff School of Theology and the University of Denver. It was a new graduate program, and they didn't quite have all the bugs worked out. In fact, I had to submit 6 different proposals for my thesis, and finally they even said, Norma, you're a teacher, you know we're not doing this right. We should be able to get our professors from these 2 departments of these schools to agree. But I just kept submitting more proposals and kept writing the thesis, so I was done with the thesis by the time I had the proposal accepted. There are quite a few people who are ABD, which means all but the dissertation. They get that far in their graduate school and don't finish. It never occurred to me to not finish. I remember Reverend Krenz, back in my deaconess internship summer, saying to me, you plan the work and work the plan. It's kind of like doing the laundry. If you were to contemplate all the loads of laundry you had to do in a year, well, it would probably fill this room and it would be overwhelming. But you simply do 1 load at a time, and that's the way you do a dissertation too. The title is The Paradox of Pluralism, a sociological, ecclesiological, and ethical perspective of the church's vocation in the public world. And yes, in there is a chapter on American civil religion and public schools. I was getting near finishing the dissertation, and again the committee seemed to not quite know how much more they wanted me to do. And a dear colleague here, Jim Bailey, said to me, Norma, in his quiet manner, just tell them you're done. And so I did. And I went out and took my exams and did receive the PhD. Burton went out with me to Denver to graduate, and together we celebrated in the mountains.